Today we're looking at two cards and we're dealing with bureaucracies that are being influenced by politics. And that happens actually on a pretty frequent basis. And really, it's about interest groups influencing the bureaucracy to make rules that probably favor their ideology. So let's look at that a little more closely. So first, we have 2.70 issue networks. That's the first thing we're looking at, issue networks. Flip over to the backside when you're ready, or pause before I go there. All right, so issue networks are a network of individuals, okay, so citizens, public officials, all right, so that could include bureaucracies, and interest groups, like formal, organized interest groups. And they form an alliance around a particular issue. Now, an issue network probably is a short-term arrangement. Some issue that just came up, and now all of a sudden, some individuals, public officials, and interest groups kind of form around that issue. By the way, public officials are also like, elected officials, of course. And they end up supporting or opposing some sort of proposed public policy. Usually that public policy is being written by a bureaucracy. So individuals, elected officials, and interest groups will align against a bureaucracy doing something or for a bureaucracy to make some sort of rule. Notice that Congress isn't making the rule here. It's the bureaucracy that's making the rule, and that's because of delegated discretionary authority. So they're being lobbied, basically, or the attempt to influence what the bureaucracy is doing. An example of this is the Keystone XL pipeline. So this is a pipeline that's going to run, an oil pipeline that's going to run from Canada all the way down to the Gulf Coast, down into Texas, where the pipeline would then the oil would then be made into refined into gasoline and other products. And so this proposed pipeline was done, and individuals against it, Native American groups because it ran near a reservation, Democrat officials, and environmental groups opposed the Keystone Pipeline. So this is an issue network, okay? So this issue comes up and they form an issue network. And then on the other side, you had labor unions who would get jobs from making the pipeline, construction, high-paying construction jobs, businesses, Republican officials, and other individuals support the Keystone Pipeline. So you had two sides here going back and forth. And in the middle here are the EPA and the Department of the Interior and other different organizations that need to rule on this. And eventually, politics changes because President Trump became president, and then the okay is given. But before that, under President Obama, it was stymied and it didn't happen. So these are just issues, shows you how the bureaucracies are not immune to politics. In fact, they may actually be very involved in politics in some way. So, there's the Keystone. By the way, there was a spill in the Keystone Pipeline, so it kind of shows you there on the line. However, the question isn't whether or not there could be a spill of a pipeline, because obviously that can. The question is what's the alternative? And the alternative is putting them on rail. Delivering oil by rail has been considered to be less safe than pipelines. So that's kind of the issue here. All right, so there's the issue, and the bureaucracy are the ones deciding ultimately on these. Okay, the other big issue, and this is actually more influential than an issue network, because an issue network, again, is usually a temporary sort of an arrangement. And now we have an iron triangle, 2.71. Iron triangle 2.71. Notice that iron has that kind of like firm idea, and that's very appropriate for this. So this is a long-standing, that's the iron part, firm, mutually beneficial relationship. So issue network are more short-term, iron networks are long-term. And this is between three different things. I mean, the reason it's called a triangle is because it's got like three different parts. It's a three-part relationship here. So a long-standing mutual relationship, beneficial relationship between an interest group, Okay, now I put up the AARP, which is the American Association of Retired Persons. So notice it says life at 50 plus, AARP, real possibilities. So these are people over the age of 50. All right, so AARP, that's a interest group. All right, so keep that in mind because we'll come back to it. A congressional committee. All right, and the congressional committee I have here is the Senate Aging Committee. All right, so the AARP has a relationship with the representatives and the senators, I should say, on the Aging Committee. That makes sense, right? And it's probably a long-standing relationship. Probably the interest group even gives money for the election of certain members of the Aging Committee, and by giving money to them, they're supporting them, and there's probably some support back toward them. And then lastly, you have a bureaucratic agency that's also devoted to a similar issue. So probably some regulations that are passed that would affect people who are aging and are over the age of 50 would be the Social Security Administration, maybe the Medicare agency, the Medicare. So what it is you have this relationship between the interest group, a committee in Congress, and the bureaucratic agency. And they're all devoted to similar issues, and they kind of help each other. The interest group gives money to the congressional committee members. The congressional committee members give money to the bureaucratic agency. The bureaucratic agency passes rules and regulations that make the interest group happy. The interest group, because now it's happy, gives more money to the congressional committee, which then gives more money to the bureaucratic agency, which then passes rules and regulations that make the interest group and the congressional members happy. So you see how this relationship, that's why it's called an iron triangle. Now, you don't have to write this thing in red, but the example is the American Association of Retired Persons, AARP, Subcommittee on Aging, and Social Security Administration work closely on issues about seniors. All right. Now, by the way, if you want to write this, that's fine. Hit a pause and write it. But it's just an example of how this works. By the way, the problem with this is that there's a lot of inside trader, kind of inside baseball terminology, and it's not open to the public. And so, therefore, interest groups end up having a much larger role in writing rules and regulations in our government than maybe the people do, especially because the congressional committees are kind of have already given over the power to the bureaucracy, and now the bureaucracy is being influenced by interest groups. And you don't even realize the interest groups are influencing them. As a public member, you don't really realize it, but the interest groups have a tremendous power as a result of this relationship. There's the relationship showing. Look at the red side. Look at the outside red. Started with interest group. The interest group gives electoral support to Congress. That means money during the election. The Congress then funds and gives support to the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy then gives regulations and special favors to the interest group based on what the interest group wants. And then the blue side on the inside, Congress passes friendly legislation and oversight toward the interest group. The interest group then gives congressional support via lobbying for the bureaucracy. It's like, hey, give money to the Social Security Administration, expand its money. So the bureaucracy likes that. And then the bureaucracy chooses policies and executes the law in a way that then makes Congress happy and makes Congress look good. So that's how this kind of relationship works. It can work well and actually be in the public interest. This can work to the public interest and be good, but it also can be that these relationships work not to the public good, but instead create the government supporting things that really shouldn't even be supported anymore, and then maybe most people don't even support, but because it's such a small part of the government, it just gets ignored, and the public doesn't even realize that these cozy relationships are out there. Here's an example. Equifax is a credit monitoring service. So it will check and see if your credit has been, it'll find what your credit score is, and it'll check your credit to make sure that you haven't been ripped off or someone's stolen your identity. Equifax lost Social Security numbers, but still works for Social Security Administration. So think about this. Equifax screwed up and lost a bunch of our Social Security numbers, and they work for the Social Security Administration. But even though they lost a bunch of Social Security numbers, they still working for the Social Security Administration. They didn't get fired for it. And so it says credit reporting firm also supplies services to Social Security Administration, Centers for Medicare, and Medicaid services. So despite the fact that they screwed up and lost people's Social Security numbers, which means a bunch of people are now potentially getting have fraud happen to them, they still get to work for them. Well, why? Well, if you look at this, Equifax political contributions, red is to Republicans, blue is to Democrats. You can see historically they give to both political parties. And then in 2014, when the Republicans took over Congress, they started giving overwhelmingly to the Republicans. And so, they don't get fired because they have political support in Congress. Why? Because they give donations to the members of Congress. All right, so that's issue networks and iron triangles, and they exert a lot of influence over the rules that bureaucracies pass.